Good afternoon, Facebook friends and YouTubers and all people all over the World Wide Webs. Hope everyone's doing good. This is Jason Dean here. And so, this whole show is going to be centered on the new Hellraiser that just came out, I believe, like 2 weeks ago, maybe less, maybe last week actually. Uh, I was and always have been a huge fan of the original. I think it's a classic, one of the classic horror movies of like the modern time. It's hard to believe that that came out in 1987. And I'm going to be doing a review on the movie, the original Clive Barker in from 1987. That's going to be a subsequent video, which I am really excited about doing a show on. For the new one that just came out, there's been a lot of hype around it. There's been a lot of talk about it and a lot of exciting news around the new, take or exploration of the classic tale. One of the biggest things around it was the new Pinhead, who originally was played by Doug Bradley. Just I think one of the Pinhead I've always felt is like one of the iconic horror figures. He's right up there with, Freddy Krueger, Jason Voorhees, Michael Myers. I feel like Pinhead is right up there with that. And I also feel like the stature of the original film was really innovative and really great classic horror that kind of explored a world we had never really seen in horror before, where it fused, sensuality and horror together, and sex and violence together, and it really had the aesthetic of, to a degree, like alternative lifestyle, say with like the bondage or S&M scene, which that film really, really explored pretty heavily, and especially the original story that Clive Barker wrote. So I was really excited to see this film. I'm a huge fan of the first two movies, particularly the first one, and the second one. I think the second Hellbound, the second one that came out a few years after the original, is probably one of the best sequels. In some ways, I almost like that a little bit more, but it's such a great. This I love it because of the scope of it, and it feels like it's got this real grand kind of presentation to it. And I always love the first one because of how gritty it is and how it's got this real perverse element to it, and it really plays in with the whole element of sexuality and violence and pleasure and pain, and really dives pretty heavily into the whole world of, kind of to a degree, the essence of alternative sexual lifestyles, meaning mostly in regards to the the world of bondage or S&M, where there's role playing, and there's the idea, the concept between, or the psychology of the master and the slave, and ownership of certain things, sexual or relinquishing control. It plays pretty heavily into that whole psychological world. And plus, it was just really incredibly gory and creepy, and the atmosphere was just incredibly creepy and scary. And Doug Bradley, like I said, he played the original Pinhead, so I've always been a huge fan. I've always felt like Pinhead is one of those iconic horror figures. So when the news was announced that Jamie Clayton was now going to be the new Pinhead, I thought that was pretty interesting, and also a pretty original bent on things as far as presenting Pinhead as a female. And the thing with Pinhead anyway, I feel like, and the Cenobites, who are the central like characters, angels to some, demons to others, where the story is centered on these figures. They There's always been a thing around the sexuality and the ambiguous and androgynous nature of their characters, where they have these feminine and male qualities. And it's always playing with those two roles, like I said, with sexuality and violence, and that pain through pleasure, pleasure through pain kind of principle, which is kind of at the core of the whole dynamic of the story. So I thought it was interesting that they cast a female to play the role of Pinhead, which I thought was a pretty cool move and also an interesting thing, and not really far removed from the whole essence of the story, because Doug Bradley's character, or his version of Pinhead, already has a very male and also a very female. Has already His character already has very much a male and female stint or view on things, and aesthetic. So it always has this androgyny to it. And I thought, so I was really excited. I was really excited to see what they might do with this new kind of take on it, because the other Hellraiser movies, I think there's probably about 4 or 5 in the franchise, and I feel like they're pretty lackluster. They're not really all that watchable. They were pretty disappointing in a lot of ways, pretty forgettable. But the originals, I feel, remain classics, and so I was very much looking forward to it. I saw the trailer for Hellraiser, the 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 remake, essentially, even though it's not a remake, a few weeks back, and I thought it looked really engaging and interesting. So it stars Jamie Clayton as Pinhead, Odessa Azione, and Drew Starkey, Brandon Flynn, and Adolf Hinn, and Selena Lowe. Um, and I believe it was directed by David Bruckner, and I believe he came off of a movie recently that was called The Lake House that I did see, and I thought that was okay. I thought it was a movie that, to a degree, got a lot of acclaim and pretty positive reviews, and I believe that was also an original uh, Hulu production, and I thought it was pretty good. I felt it it dropped the ball at times, and I felt I kind of was not. By the end of it, I was kind of checked out. I felt like the story, the cinematography, and there was some really great tension around the film, but I kind of checked out of it. It didn't really hold my attention right to the end, but I thought it was pretty good. It's one of those movies I probably would like to see again. But visually and also from a director standpoint, I thought it was pretty interesting, and it was definitely like engaging in a lot of ways, and it was pretty original for the most part. So Bruckner also directed this newer version of Hellraiser, and again, this was a Hulu original, and it's so I watched it last night over a friend's house, and I guess like a few weeks ago, or maybe it was maybe a few months ago, there was also a Predator sequel that came out, and I believe it was called Prey, which I haven't seen, but I heard it was very good. I did watch the trailer for it, and it looked really original, and it looked really good, and it felt like it was giving you something new. That's also a franchise that has suffered quite a bit after without a doubt after the first one. The second one is okay, but and there's been quite a few, and it's been really, I don't know, really a really inconsistent franchise in a lot of ways. Kind of disappointing, but they've tried to milk it. But I've heard that the newer one, Prey, was actually a really great movie and kind of its own thing. And from what I gathered from the trailer, it looked very original. So, but the interesting thing is that both Prey and this Hellraiser movie were both released exclusively through Hulu. And I saw a review of Hellraiser. There's a guy I follow on YouTube called Chris, who is Chris Stuckman, and he's pretty fantastic. He's one of the bigger voices as far as being a movie reviewer and lover of film on YouTube. And he had gotten the chance to see Hellraiser in a screening at this horror festival, I believe, in Texas. And he got to see it on the big screen. And he was talking about, it was great. He gave it a pretty good review overall, but he felt like, wow, like this is great to be able to actually see this in the theater. And he didn't understand why. He felt like it was hard to understand why this film and then also the last Predator movie wasn't released on the big screen. It's all, strictly through a streaming platform. And that's how I watched it last night, because I feel like the scope and the production element of particularly Hellraiser is very cool and pretty amazing, and it feels like it needs to be on the big screen. But I watched it at a buddy's house last night, but Chris Stuckman was talking about how he didn't understand why that's a thing. Why, that's great that this company Hulu and and Hulu's amongst a bunch of other streaming companies that are also doing these original productions. But he felt like, well, it's kind of selling this movie short. It needs to be on the big screen. It needs to be shown on the big screen in a theater to have that real cinematic experience. But anyway, I totally agree with that. After watching Hellraiser, so we watched it on my buddy's house, and we watched it on television, Emmett Layler, and that's kind of how I felt too. I felt like, the production, just from the visual and the production side of things, like it was very well done. Some of the set design was pretty encouraging. And going into this, like, I didn't know much about it. I essentially thought it was going to be maybe some kind of continuation of the Hellraiser franchise to a degree, or some kind of maybe a prequel to the original Hellraiser, or maybe just a kind of a carbon copy, more or less, of the original. But the thing that I liked about it was very original. I thought it had nothing to do really with the first one, the one that came out in 1987. I thought it was definitely its own thing, and how it introduced an entirely new set of characters. The woman who is the central character of the film is like a recovering addict. Odessa, Odessa Izion. She's like the main character, and basically it's centered on her, she's like in this recovery stage of her life, and her boyfriend have both met in rehab. That's where they met, and then they decide they get involved with this, what they think could be a real substantial robbery, and they recover they end up robbing this storefront, or this warehouse. They break into this warehouse and they capture the puzzle box where the whole story is centered on, and basically that unleashes the Cenobites. But so the thing was, I thought the characters were really great. She was a really interesting character, pretty complicated, and I thought she does a lot of things, or at least her character does a lot of things that are pretty questionable. So sometimes you don't really like her, and then sometimes you have empathy towards her. But I thought that was an interesting take of having her as like kind of the more or less of the hero of the story, and she's very, very complicated. And the rest of the cast I thought was pretty good. I was a little bit worried. Like, the movie's roughly about, I guess, 2 hours or so. And the first half, the introduction of the film, it has I like the slow pace. of the story, and I like the slow development of that. And there's hints of the horror that kind of creep in, but it doesn't rely on the typical jump scares, which I thought was kind of cool. And I thought the writing was pretty good. I thought the cast was overall pretty good. I felt the rest of the cast, aside from the two central characters, were by the third act. I kind of was a little bit checked out with them. I didn't really feel like they were quite as strong. I thought it was pretty good. I thought they were pretty good. But Odessa Azion was like, she really carried the story. I thought she was a uh, very strong actress in the film, and I thought the writing was very interesting. Um, Jamie Clayton as Pinhead, I thought was very cool. I was very impressed with her as Pinhead. And I particularly really loved the dialogue of of her character as Pinhead. I thought that was really interesting. I thought that got pretty heavily into the whole world of the, or to a degree, got pretty heavily into the world of the essence of the story of, the pain versus pleasure, pleasure versus pain, and the whole kind of S&M, BDSM aspect of the movie. Um, and I thought that was very cool. I thought her dialogue was really great. The new design for Pinhead I thought was very cool. It kind of got away from the whole like latex leather thing into where their suits were essentially made out of their own flesh, and I thought that was pretty interesting and different. The newer versions of the Cenobites, I thought that was very impressive. Um, and again, like I said, I thought the set design for for a lot of the scenes were was very cool. I really liked the ending. I thought, okay, maybe there's going to be, there are certain parts of the film where I felt it was kind of lagging a little bit, or a little bit, to a degree, left me a little bit unsatisfied. But I thought the ending was really interesting, and it was a really, I felt like it was a good payoff and kind of tied everything together. Um, but overall, I was impressed. I thought it was a good addition, and I also feel like the way the film was created, the structure, the narrative of the story, and it being its own kind of separate thing, it definitely left it open to where there could be more movies and other interpretations of this classic story based on Clive Barker. I thought the filmmakers and the people involved with the film definitely cared about the story and cared about the original. There were, these little tips of the hat to the original, but yet it was doing its own thing. It wasn't trying to be that film, which I thought was cool. Gave you something a little bit new. Um, but it's funny because I liked it. I liked the story, and I thought the acting was really good. I felt the side characters, or the cast, aside from the two leads, were okay. I thought I wasn't really 100% behind them. I thought that was um, a little bit of a letdown. And the other aspect of the film, which I thought was to a degree a letdown, was the same subject I kind of talked about, where the central kind of idea, or the essence of the story of Hellraiser, is about the whole, more or less, the psychology of the BDSM and the people who live that alternative lifestyle, where there is this sexual desire for pleasure and pain, and those, that intersection where both of these emotions and pleasures emerge. And I felt that it didn't really dive into that. Like my initial response to the film was I liked it, and then the ending came about, and I was like, okay, this was pretty cool. It immediately made me want to watch the original, and I thought they did a although they did a really good job in a lot of ways, I felt like it didn't really dive into that essence of the whole S&M BDSM aesthetic around the film. And I felt the violence and the gore was a little bit, although this movie has that, I felt initially it was a little bit sanitized to a degree. I felt like it was not quite there, you know. And with the original film, which I love so much, which was centered on Frank, who is like the main one of the main characters who in the original who acquires this box, and he's kind of this incredibly perverse, you know, monster, and he eventually acquires the box and is basically he opens up the portal through using the puzzle box and opens up the Cenobites and brings forth the Cenobites. And his whole thing of where he was trying to kind of come back to the flesh, and his wife or his girlfriend, who is Frank's brother, he's having an affair with uh, Frank's brother's wife. And I thought that whole perverse kind of dynamic was really interesting. It was really seedy. But then he also she was having an affair with Frank, but then she, in order for him to kind of gain his flesh back and his mortality or his presence back in the real world, that required the blood of victims. So she became essentially a serial killer and was like bringing people into the house, and it was, you know, ultra disturbing and perverse, and it really played in with that whole theme of sexuality and violence. And it was very gory and graphic, and I felt like that really focused. The first one really focused pretty heavily on that, which is the core essence of the story. So I felt watching the second one or this newer one, it didn't have that. I felt like it didn't have that impact. It didn't have that seedy, perverse nature that the first one had. It didn't have the serial killer element. You know, the whole all those scenes in the first one where she's like luring these people, at these random guys that she meets at bars, to have like these one night stands, but she's just bringing them back to her house so she can kill them. And scenes where she's like, you know, she like kills a guy, hits him over the head with a hammer, and it's super disturbing and super messed up and super gory. And I felt that aspect of the film wasn't there for the new one. It delivered in a lot of other ways. I think the saving grace for it was that it was something new and it was different. It wasn't trying to be that film. Um, and again, it does play with those themes. The new one, I think that the new one does play in those themes. But you know, without knocking it, I do feel that there was a degree of where the creators of this film at Hulu tried to maybe make it to a degree a film that could reach a broader audience. So maybe those elements were kind of kept in the background a little bit or were softened. Um, it delivered on a lot of on a lot of other levels, but that was my first impression of the film. But overall, I would say it's worth checking out, and it's definitely original, and there's got some great aspects of it. But I felt obviously not as good as the first two, without a doubt. But those are my two biggest initial problems with it. Again, I want to see it again, and I probably will see it again. But initially, those are my first two things that were like that tone or that 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 aesthetic or that essence of the story wasn't quite the same for this newer one. And although I felt these filmmakers were very much into this film and very much not just turning out like you know, a cookie cutter version of the film. I felt like there was a lot of detail and a lot of love put into this film, but I felt like those two elements, which, you know, at the end of the day are the kind of the main essence of the story, those were uh, not as nowhere near as strong, and the and I kind of felt it was probably done in a way to maybe reach a you know, a little bit of a broader audience, because the first one, the original Hellraiser, really is pretty. Uh, it definitely pushes the envelope, and it deals heavily with a very, to a degree, controversial subject. But that being said, I would say to definitely check it out and get a chance. But I'm very interested, and I'm looking forward to watching the original Hellraiser and doing a show on that. I've seen it many, many, many times, and it's always been one of my favorites. I have it on Blu-ray, but I'm gonna watch it soon and do a show where I'm just gonna be talking about that, since this newer version is still fresh in my head. So that will be interesting. So again, this is Jason Dean at Film Fanatic. If you get a chance, like and subscribe to my YouTube channel, and we will see you soon. Thank you.